I'm your host today, Allison Weir, a board member of the Council for the National Interest and also executive director of If Americans Knew. I'm once again very excited at the guests we have on our program. During the first half, and really for the whole show, we will have with us the CNI delegation that has just returned from the Middle East, speaking with numerous high officials and government leaders and private citizens throughout the Middle East, including spending time in Gaza, a place that is very difficult to get into. So it will be exciting to hear from them and from Jean Bird, who is the president of CNI and a retired longtime Foreign Service officer. In the second half of the program, we will also have a former board member of CNI, Ambassador Ed Peck. Ed Peck was also a longtime Foreign Service officer. He was an ambassador and the head of mission, which is basically the ambassador to Iraq. He was also a high official in the Reagan White House, deputy director, I believe, of the Council Investigating Terrorism. Ed Peck also was on the aid flotilla trying to take humanitarian aid to Gaza, the flotilla that recently was attacked by the Israeli Navy. So in the second half of the program, we will also have Ed Peck telling us about that experience. We have other delegate members on the line. Who am I speaking with right now?
Okay, this is Chuck Farrar, and I'm
great.
a physician from San Francisco and a radiologist by specialty. And Judy DeWalt went with me, and we both are second-time pilgrims. We both went in November.
So you've just gotten back to the U.S. within the last few days, I guess it is?
Yes.
I'm sure you're aware of what's been in the news quite a bit, even the mainstream news for once, has been this Israeli attack on the aid flotilla trying to take humanitarian aid to Gaza. You were in the region, I believe, while that attack took place. Is that correct?
That is correct. We were in Beirut when we were informed that the flotilla had been attacked.
Can you tell me a little bit about what it was like being there, what people were saying, how you heard about this?
We heard about it from Franklin Lamb, who is an American doing some work there for the Palestinian refugee camps. Specifically, he's addressing the issue of Palestinians being able to have the right to work in Lebanon. But he has worked intimately with CNI in the past and with the pilgrimage groups.
What did you hear about the attack? Did you talk to other people in Lebanon, and what were their views?
They didn't think it was too dissonant with what the Israelis have done in the past, having experienced the previous attack on Gaza and the 1,500 casualties incurred, and the attacks on hospitals, on ambulances, on chicken processing plants, ice cream, and so forth, yada, 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 because of supposed missile attacks on Israel. And so they viewed this as part of an ongoing process, as far as I could tell. We did not probe them too much. It was obviously a very emotional issue.
Especially since Lebanon itself, just, 2 or 3 years ago, experienced this kind of ruthless attack. I believe 1,000 Lebanese were killed.
Yes, in 2006. I have to say that in Lebanon, people were glued to the TV sets. Al Jazeera and CNN were reporting it. And also, when we came back, we changed planes in Frankfurt, and again, the TVs were on in the airport, but people were glued to them.
Over there, of course, they would have been listening to Al Jazeera Arabic.
Yes, they were. But there were casts later on in English.
What kind of images were people seeing, and can you describe anything about what the press coverage was you were able to see both in Lebanon itself, in the Middle East, and also in Germany?
We weren't in Germany.
We changed planes in Frankfurt.
It sounds like you were in the Frankfurt airport seeing the images that were on that TV.
Yeah, absolutely. They were showing the Israeli filming. There was also filming of the prisoners. There were interviews with people. Like Chuck said, it was very emotional. And people were just glued to it, and you could just see it was emotionally raw.
People in that region are not, I expect they're not surprised by the attack, although I imagine somewhat horrified by it.
No, they were surprised. They were really surprised. There were people who expressed that they were surprised, and they also referred to it as an incredibly stupid move, as in unbelievable on Israel's part. They weren't referring to Israelis as stupid. They were saying that, among their options, this was not a smart one.
And many Israeli supporters in this country, you can sort of see, I think, really feel, and I think they're correct in this, that this was quite a stupid move by Netanyahu. I personally think it will probably bring down Netanyahu and replace him with someone who will be less foolish, not less ruthless, but a little bit better at deceiving the American public.
Well, all through our travels, the Arab people with whom we spoke said this is the last chance for peace, and they desperately wanted peace. They felt hopeful with Mitchell, and they felt very hopeful with the peace talks. A lot of the leaders were in Washington, D.C. with the pre-talks for Netanyahu's visit. They were surprised at such belligerency.
Interestingly enough, the day before we were in Amman, and we met with multiple people there. There's kind of a heightened expectation that something is going to happen. Try to pin them down. It's hard to get to specifics, but they seem to have a feeling that something dramatic diplomatically is going to happen, or maybe war is going to happen. But there was a lot of anxiety and a lot of tension in Amman. And then we come into Lebanon, and this happens. As Judy was saying, I mean, the stupidity of it, and it's got multiple facets. But one is they're way out in international waters. It isn't like they're anywhere close to the coast. And also, most of the people they killed were Turkish. Now, that's not very smart. Turkey is somebody they haven't had too many problems with, and I imagine that's going to change.
As I understand it, it was their only Muslim ally.
Yes.
Since the ship was carrying a Turkish flag, that's officially Turkish territory. If this was an approved attack, according to a legal expert that I've just been reading, that's an act of war against Turkey.
Yes, and I believe Turkey is filing suit.
According to Craig Murray, who's a former British ambassador and also an expert on maritime law, has written about this quite a bit. This is his specific expertise. And he has written that either this was an act of war against Turkey. If Israel is not at war with Turkey, then it is murder of Turkish citizens, and it is Turkey that has the legal right to investigate it. Israel has the legal obligation to turn over the perpetrators to the Turkish government.
I would agree. We certainly refer to Somali people who go out into international waters and hijack ships as pirates and piracy.
Going back to Chuck's earlier comment about Amman, it sounded, if I understood you correctly, there was really a heightened expectation that this could be a sea change in the region, either for the better or for the worse.
That's
either
what we heard.
It could be close or it could be really significant.
Yeah, we also had a visit in the Knesset with Mr. Simon, who's a member of the Knesset, and he voiced the same thing. He said that it's a very right brain. I mean, he didn't have specifics, but that he sensed that it was going to be a move for peace or a move for something very bad.
Welcome back. This is Allison Weir on CNI Jerusalem Calling. With me on this portion of the hour are Chuck Farrar and Judy DeWalt, two San Francisco residents who have just returned from a CNI delegation that traveled throughout the Middle East and spent time in Gaza as well. Chuck, it was very interesting to hear what you said about your meeting both in Lebanon, Amman, and in Israel itself, with the Knesset members saying that they felt that this was a very historic time with the potential for great change. I just returned from Beijing, China, where I heard from so many people telling me, do Americans have any idea how damaging our support for Israeli actions is to the United States and to Americans? So I think when you're overseas, you hear about how significant this is, although in the U.S., most Americans have no idea about that. One thing I wanted to especially ask you about is your time in Gaza. One of the talking points that the Israeli government is using about their recent attack on a U.S. aid ship to Gaza was that, quote, there is no humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Having just spent a bit of time there, can you describe what you saw? Is there devastation? Are there destroyed homes? Is there any kind of difficulty in Gaza right now?
Absolutely. The average Gazan is existing on the equivalent of $1 a day, if you can imagine that. I am a physician radiologist, not on this trip, but in November. The most recent we went in, and they're dreadfully short of medical supplies of all sorts. They have one very antiquated CAT scan machine, which would be absolutely critical in any sort of traumatic or wartime event where people have multiple trauma-induced wounds. They have no MRI, and basic things such as intravenous fluid. They have some, but they're short on that as well. We met with the UNRWA representative, Mr. Jing, and he said that the hypocrisy of it all was that the Israeli embargo is, in effect, shutting down UN supplies coming in, and illegal supplies that come through the tunnel are still getting in. Cement and so forth that the Israelis claim the Gazans will build bunkers with are getting in illegally without restraint, but they can't rebuild their homes and buildings on the Israeli side because they say it will be used for military purposes. One thing I want to mention very quickly, we did see Israeli commandos, roughly our equivalent of Navy SEALs, They're supposed to be a very, very elite group. And they were rappelling down from helicopters onto the boats, taking away helmets or whatever the people on the boats had, and then shooting some of them. Mr. Netanyahu said they were fighting for their lives. Well, if these are really SEAL equivalents, that seems totally incongruous to me, how that they could be fighting for their lives against unarmed civilians.
I'd like to add that the American who was killed, I believe he was shot 5 times, 4 in the head and 1 in the chest, which seems to be an incredible situation to be called an accident.
That's overkill.
Intentional killing and overkilling.
I want to briefly touch on the point that you mentioned. The Gazans, for that many people all over the Middle East, they simply cannot believe Americans really don't know what's going on in the Middle East. They think that's totally incongruous. How can this be? How is it possible that a country that claims to be in information leading the world doesn't know what's going on in the Middle East? And it's really hard to persuade them that that's a fact, but it certainly points to the task that's laid out for CNI and other similar groups. Desperate need to educate the American public. They adopt the attitude that ignorance is no excuse, and I see their point.
Look at the extreme destruction that's being done not only by Israel, but by Israeli partisans in this country. They have managed to create a situation in which the American public's tax money and our elected government are supporting ruthless war crimes in the Middle East, creating enormous tragedy to thousands of people in the region. Meanwhile, they are dominating our media so successfully that in this democratic republic, most people have no idea what's going on, even those who try to follow the media, who try to read the New York Times, watch CNN, Fox News, etc. So it's just an astounding situation. I agree. People in the rest of the world find it almost impossible to believe, and those of us who know what's going on, I think, continually find it almost impossible to believe and to keep seeing right in front of our eyes.
I think this is a very prevalent sentiment in the Middle East. The total disconnect between traditional American values and American foreign policy. People in the Middle East, in general, admire American domestic values and admire the Constitution of the United States. It's totally incongruous to them of how this could be our set of values, and we come to foreign policy, and game change, guys, we can't conceive that other people would have the same set of feelings that we have, and the need for freedom of speech, freedom of this, that, and the other, and above all, dignity.
As a person who's been there twice, I would invite any disbeliever to check it out for themselves, be a witness to what is going on, go over there and see what it's like to be an open-air prison where highly educated people have absolutely no opportunity to the outside, and that is Gaza, and the Palestinians who are leading peaceful resistance movements in letters to President Obama, a boycott of Israeli goods, or just nonviolent movements that have been going on for quite some time in the Palestinian areas. Go over there and see for yourself. It's a great opportunity to learn.
I agree. Having been there in July, briefly, it's so difficult to get into Gaza. I know at that time I saw entire large neighborhoods that had just been flattened. They were rubble. People at that time were still living in tents because of the Israeli illegal blockade of preventing building materials, medicines, as you say, X-ray films. I know that they were in great need of X-ray film.
Thousands are still living in tents on the beach, wow. And it's hot. It's hotter than blazes.
The media aren't reporting that. We're not seeing it in all this discussion about this attack on an aid flotilla. Why are they not showing the images of why this aid is so desperately required? Those images are obtainable. Al Jazeera's there. Other people have been there. The images could be shown on CNN, on Fox News. NPR could be talking about them. PBS could show them. And yet, American public is not having access to that.
Well, it seems that the major networks could be sending a correspondent over, because this is a war zone.
It disagrees with the Israeli dialogue. I mean, that is why. Mm-hmm. The Israeli dialogue is chronologically incorrect. You speak with anyone and they'll say, in this country, if you speak with a AIPAC or AIPAC-affiliated group, you say, it is hideous what they're doing to Gaza, and they'll say, well, buddy, we tried that, and they started launching missiles. Well, in point of fact, no missiles were launched until the elections were held, Hamas won, and Israel shut down the border. And then they launched some homemade missiles with poor guidance system, which killed, it's an estimated maximum 14 Israeli citizens, some of which were killed by friendly fire, by the way. And in response, the Israelis killed 1,500 Gazans, 1,500.
That's right.
Many of them women and children and old men. Non-combatants, indiscriminate, and it's totally an iron-fisted policy. It's a total absolute act of terror.
We have a caller on the line. We only have 1 minute before the break. With us from Washington, D.C. is Todd.
I just want to relate an experience I had traveling overseas. That the bad image from U.S. support of Israel isn't limited to the Middle East. I was in Venezuela during the Gaza Israeli strike in January 2009, and all the images in the government press is vitriolically anti-American, and all the images of the Israeli actions, there were superimposed depictions of Uncle Sam and American flags and everything like that. This 100% backing of Israel, we incorporate its foreign policy actions onto our own image.
That's disturbing and revealing. So here we have 3 of us just back from the Middle East, from Asia, and from South America, all describing how extremely destructive U.S. foreign policy is, especially our policy of supporting Israel. Welcome back. I'm your host today, Allison Weir. With me are several guests. One is Dr. Chuck Farrar, a San Francisco resident who just came back from Gaza not long ago. Also coming up fairly soon will be Ambassador Edward Peck, a former high Reagan official, longtime Foreign Service officer who was on the aid flotilla trying to take humanitarian aid to Gaza that was so violently attacked by Israeli forces. And right now I'll take a caller from Crawford, Texas, I assume.
Hello.
Hi, Preston. Do you have a question or a quick comment?
Yes. Recently, Norman Finkelstein come out with a very harsh critique of Israel's latest action, referred to Israel as a nation of lunatics, which is pretty harsh. I found myself befuddled and stunned when Netanyahu came out with a statement after this and said that Israel has a right to defend itself against basically a humanitarian flotilla. I found myself almost laughing at the absurd and ludicrous nature of that statement. With statements such as that coming from the Israeli government, and yet the United States can't even find a strong rebuke or condemnation of these actions. And I have to wonder, why is it that the United States cannot treat Israel as though we treat every other nation?
My view, Preston, is that the reason that Israel continues to get away with this, and the reason that the President of the United States, unlike almost every other head of state recently, has failed to condemn illegal, ruthless act of war or murder against a humanitarian aid mission, is because the general American has no idea what's going on. Ambassador Peck, I believe, has just joined us.
How are you, dear?
I'm good, thanks. It's so good to hear you and to know you're back safely. I imagine your wife was relieved when she finally heard that you were okay.
I think she was relieved. She was trying to figure out what the heck to do, and there was no way to reach me because everything was confiscated and we were held in what qualifies as confinement. And I could not call her until the plane on which they had put me landed in New Jersey Monday. I forgot what day it was. Tuesday? I don't know.
I can imagine you're still reeling. Israel is trying to claim itself as the victim, and yet it is the party that is confiscating cell phones, confiscating cameras, keeping people, even you yourself, a retired ambassador, and yet keeping you prisoner, not allowing you to even make phone calls or speak to the press until you finally were released. If you could describe what it was like when you were on that ship.
I was on a small boat. I was not on the big boat with the 600 or whatever it was passengers. And our boat was taken over so quickly because the commandos who came on a peace-giving mission stepped from the deck of their boat onto the deck of our boat, and boop, it was over for the people on the main deck where I was. You look up, and my gosh, here's these guys coming on with machine guns and stun grenades and the pistols, and 2 of them had paint guns, which was kind of interesting. That's all Israeli government ever talks about. I don't imagine they send out usually commandos armed only with paint guns or perhaps fly whisks, but nonetheless, they know how to control the media the way they want it. Now, the people on the upper deck who were trying to provide what is called passive resistance by blocking access to the wheelhouse, by locking arms and all of that, were done in by the commandos who broke windows, used the stun grenade, tasers, and physical force to remove the people, hurting some of them, nothing critical, but fairly seriously to get them out of the way. And in no time at all, it was over, that part of the effort. Later, one of our leaders threw himself off the boat into the water to delay things further, and it took them a while to fish him out. And he's the man who was later in a hospital in the prison there in Ashdod, refusing treatment. He's a valiant, hard-fighting believer in the future and security of everybody in the area, including, of course, Israel. what interests me is how it is presented in so much of the news that we see, that the men and women on this Turkish flag vessel in international waters, faced with an attack by heavily armed commandos from a foreign country who wanted to take over the ship and take it to a place where the passengers didn't want to go, are accused of attacking those people. That's a misuse of the English language. They were defending the ship against an attack. And how this gets turned around is understandable, because that's the way people manipulate the news. But if somebody appears at my door trying to come in and I don't want them, I'm not attacking them.
It's almost as though George Orwell were writing the script. Approximately how many commandos came onto your small boat? Looks like we've temporarily lost Ed Peck. He'll be back on the line soon, I'm told.
Here I am. I just have to tell you, I wondered, how did the Israelis break that line? The Washingtonian magazine carried one of my more famous aphorisms over my name, and it said, the wonderful advantage of being paranoid is that everything fits. So anyway, the English language is being so badly misused. I give you an example. I arrived in Ashdod, was taken off the ship, presented to some officials who said, we're going to deport you. All right, and they said, because you broke Israeli law. I said, excuse me, I just got here. What Israeli law did I break? And they said, you entered the country illegally. And I said, sir, my ship was taken forcefully on the international waters by your armed forces, and they brought us here under duress. I essentially have a gun at my back. And you accuse me of entering your country illegally? I said, that's not the English language that I'm used to, because you forced me to come here. This, in a way, is a microcosm of the issues we're dealing with. Who's a defender, who's an attacker, who's doing it illegally, and he's doing it legally. From the Israeli perspective, it's all legal, and decent and sanitary, and from the perspective of virtually everybody else in the world, it's a violation of everything that our nation stands for, and the Israelis say their nation stands for.
There's so much. I wish we had several hours to speak with you, but there are a few things I wanted to know specifically that you saw. First of all, about how many commandos came aboard, and can you again describe the weaponry that they had with them?
It was 4 a.m. They came on board dressed in uniforms. They had on helmets. They were wearing baklava masks, so all we ever saw was their eyes. They had those on the whole time they were on the ship. All we saw were their eyes. They all had automatic weapons, what we call machine guns, but submachine guns, in their hands with the finger outside the trigger guard. They all had pistols, they had stun grenades, they had tasers, and a couple of them had paintball guns, which can be used for a fairly relatively painless, unless it depends where the paintball hits you, I suppose. And one of our members, Joe Midors, who the Liberty veteran, was put on the plane with me. All of us, we got off the ship with the clothes we've been wearing for 3 days, and his T-shirt was stained with paintball colors, which he said stung, but, with a guy like that and his size, didn't really stop him from doing anything in terms of grappling with the people.
The other thing that you mentioned in another interview, I believe, is that you saw people after this on crutches.
Yeah.
Can you describe that?
Sure. When we got to Ashdod, they took us off the boat, and the first people to get off were the people who'd been injured. The people in neck braces from having grappling, people with arms in slings, people with bandages on head, one guy on crutches, and other people limping. This is the sort of thing that happens when passive resistance encounters military force.
Welcome back. I'm your host, Allison Weir, from the Council for the National Interest, and also from If Americans Do. Many people are trying to phone in to speak with our guest, Ambassador Edward Peck, who was on the Gaza aid flotilla that was recently attacked so violently by Israel. First is a caller from Queens, Carl.
Yeah, hi, Ambassador Peck. Thank you for everything you're doing. I just called the White House regarding the flotilla incident to urge President Obama to draw his own conclusions by going to the scorecard only, not the BS propaganda. The score of 9-0 should tell it all. And a while ago, in anger, I said that with friends like Israel, who needs enemies? And a month or so later, an Israeli big shot said, with friends like America, who needs enemies? And the funny part about that is we're both right. Thank you for everything you did. And CNI, I thank all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. Thanks for your comments, and thank you for making those phone calls. With us, we have now another caller from Spencer. David?
Okay, I just noticed that one of the people killed was a teenage boy named Furkan Dogan, who had dual U.S. Turkish citizenship. And my question is, will the fact that a U.S. citizen was killed have any effect on the U.S. response?
Ed, what do you think?
I think I mentioned that one of the people who came on our ship was a veteran of the USS Liberty, the naval U.S. warship on which 34 Americans were killed and another 170 wounded by Israel in the 67 war when they were off the coast and international waters, and nothing happened from that. So as much as I regret it, I'm not sure the Americans are going to do much of anything about this poor guy who got shot accidentally 5 times. Huh?
And as I understand, 4 times in the head.
Yes, so that was taken. That's fairly serious, 4 times. And so you can't really accuse him of committing suicide, can you?
Yes, I'm glad you brought up about Joe Metters, who the media seem to be largely ignoring, a decorated Navy veteran who now has been on 2 ships or boats attacked without provocation by the Israeli Navy.
Yep. He has a record there.
June 8th is the anniversary of that attack.
That is correct.
We're encouraging people to distribute information about the Israeli attack on the Liberty. For one thing, it's extremely significant. Those veterans deserve our support, and it sometimes helps to open eyes about what's been going on over the past many decades. With us is another caller from Northborough, Imad.
Thank you, Alison. It's not a question, it's just actually a comment. I would like to just thank all of you for the wonderful effort you do to educate the public about this struggle and the unbelievable amount of injustice inflicted and the media spinning the information and the news. Ambassador Peck has described really as a microcosm of what has been going on for more than 60 years. The aggressor playing the role of the victim. The rapist complaining that the rape victim is scratching his face, basically. And I thank you very much for everything you did and you continue to do.
Thank you for your call. Next, we have a caller who's called in from London.
Hi, my name is Shorov. I've been following the events after the massacre on the flotilla pretty closely, and I've been to a few protests, and I've also been following the propaganda that's been released by the Israeli government. And I just wanted to know what to make of the video they've released showing people on the ship attacking Israeli soldiers with metal rods. I don't know if it's real. I know some of the other materials they've released, like photographs, have been identified as forgeries or old photographs. But basically, for the purpose of understanding exactly what happened, I'm trying to get a sense of what happened. So I'd like to know if anyone has any perspective on this.
Ed, while I think of it, if you could quickly at least saw the transcript, or maybe it was a partial one, of what CNN carried about their interview with you, my guess is they didn't carry much of what you said to them. Can you tell me a little bit about the CNN coverage of their interview with you and maybe address both of these points?
Well, I have not seen a single interview that I gave. I've just been going from station to station to station pretty solidly, and I haven't seen myself on any program, although I've done, good Lord, quite a few of them. The gentleman's question is interesting because he's used this word that the Israelis want us to use, is that the passengers were attacking the armed commandos trying to take over the ship. And that is not attacking, that's defending. Israeli soldiers had no right to be there, and the people who were on the ship said, no, you're not going to do this to us. That's called defending the home, if you will. That's not attacking.
That's such an important point. And in terms of what they may have grabbed near at hand to use in defending themselves, at this point, many of us probably don't know because Israel is blocking the information. They've confiscated the cameras that people had that probably could have made it clear to us what materials they may have used in defending themselves. So at this point, I certainly don't know. Go ahead, Ed.
No, there's just one thing that I wanted to get in, and because I've been saying this on all the programs, nobody wants anything bad to happen to anybody out there in the Middle East. Not an Israeli, not a Palestinian, not an American, but bad things have happened, are happening, and are going to happen because of what is and is not happening in Israel, Palestine, and Gaza. And what we were trying to do was to provide for the Israelis an opportunity to say, hey, okay, humanitarian goods, take them in there, and we'll look like good guys for a change. But Israel's approach, generally speaking, has always been the mailed fist rather than the open hand. And we see a demonstration of this now and recognize that it's going to cost Israel and its only remaining backer, if you will, the United States of America, all around the world.
we'll quickly try to take one quick question from Moji in Tucson, Arizona. Moji, could you quick give us your question? Thanks.
Sure. Thank you for everything you're doing, Ambassador Peck and other lovers of justice. My question is, how can we protect Judaism from Zionism?
Ed, do you have a comment about that? Thank you, Moji.
I couldn't hear the question. I'm awfully sorry.
He was asking how we can help protect Judaism from Zionism.
Well, that's a question you only have to ask people who are members of the club. Zionism is a political thought, I guess. It isn't closely related to Judaism, as I remember what Judaism is. And the people in charge believe, and this is always the key word, belief. They believe that they're doing the right thing to advance Israel's interests and the interests of the Jewish people who live there. I fear they are wrong, and I hope I am there. I fear they are wrong, and I hope I am there. I fear they are